I hate to say I told you so, but I also kind of love it. Hold on. I feel like I'm doing a lot of these videos this year, these just like I told you so videos, and not to come across as arrogant or whatever, I just believe in the truth and I believe the truth matters. And so if you're ever vindicated when you were right, especially when you were fighting against a sea of demons, ogres, and big bags who were threatening your life and hating you for years and saying horrific things about you because you had the audacity to speak the truth, I believe you deserve a quick moment to just be like, told you so. So this is my told you so. Trans has absolutely become a trend. Why are fewer young people identifying as trans? This is, there's a lot of articles coming out this week. You may have seen these sorts of headlines because there's new data. The numbers are in, and you don't need the numbers if you've been subscribed to Blaire White for the past decade. You don't need the numbers if you're part of the Blaire White army because you just saw it coming because we saw it coming. But a surprising shift is taking place in the gender and sexual identities of young Americans. The Center for Heterodox Social Science says that since 2023, both trans and queer identification have dropped sharply within Gen Z. So here's the graph, as you can see. So we're looking at between the end of 2019 and 2020. I wonder what happened then. Nothing much, right? There is this huge spike and it starts going up, up, up all the way until you get to 2023, which definitely, according to my own just like recollection, did feel like it peaked in 2023. Like this graph feels right because it just matches my experience and what I've seen as someone who covers this obviously a lot. So in 23, almost 10% of young people in schools were identifying as trans or non-binary. Now, I have a lot of empathy for Gen Z. Well, first of all, let's get to the positive. It is now dipping all the way down. 2025, it's nearly half, but it's only to about what it was in 2021. So still some work to do. However, I have a lot of empathy for Gen Z, like I was about to say. This is a generation that was denied things like prom, denied graduations, really important milestones in becoming a young adult. And so I always knew like it would have to be turned around, this and many other things that were afflicting Gen Z. The way that a pandemic turned people trans needs to be studied. You guys already know how broken the media landscape is right now. Between misinformation, censorship, and the constant lack of transparency, it is borderline impossible to trust anything you're reading or seeing. And that is exactly why I use the amazing Ground News. Ground News pulls from every major news outlet, right, left, center, so you can actually see and compare how the story may or may not being spun in a certain direction. Like this story that just broke. Trump DOJ is reportedly looking at ways to ban transgender Americans from owning guns. So let's compare the headlines. From The Intercept, which is left-leaning, Trump's DOJ wants to deprive trans people of the right to self-defense. And then the Free Press, which is right-leaning, gun rights group slams DOJ for considering gun ban on transgender people. So two totally different takes on the same event. And Ground News lets me see that contrast instantly, which is priceless for the job that I do, but important for all of us because we're all taking in news and information at all times. It makes it so that you're not blindly trusting a single outlet's framing. Another amazing feature from Ground News that I use is the blind spot feed. For example, a story like "We'll Be Moving, Alberta transgender children and families brace for legal changes." So this was mostly covered by left-leaning outlets, and if you only follow right-wing outlets, you probably haven't even seen it. The blind spot feed is going to make sure that you stay informed and that you don't fall into any echo chambers, which is again so amazing. Whether it's LGBT news or national politics, Ground News keeps me up to speed without the bias. And at this point, I seriously use it for every single video that I make. Every video you guys watch, Ground News has been involved. So go to ground.news/Blaire White or scan the QR code somewhere on the screen to get 40% off of their Vantage plan. That's just $5 a month to finally see the full picture. Thank you so much to Ground News for sponsoring this video, and now on to the rest of the video.
It's too bad, Daria. I always kind of felt you understood the way I think.
Like, I know nothing in the history books is going to be true or valid about the COVID years and what happened, it's all going to be fabrications, lies, fairy tales, and fantasies. However, like, this needs to be part of the conversation amongst the people. Like, how did a pandemic turn people trans? Like, how does that happen? And make no mistake, despite it sounding like a crazy sentence, it's what happened. Crazy doesn't mean wrong. There's now this discourse on TikTok from people talking about what actually happened in 2020. What happened during the pandemic when everyone thought they were trans and non-binary and shit. And the videos are just very airheaded, like everybody's still clearly asleep, so we'll have to correct them. But here's one.
And what happened in 2020? More specifically, why was everyone becoming queer? And I think I have the answer to that. First of all, you weren't becoming queer, you were coming to know what it meant to be queer and coming to realize that that might have been you. But to grasp this phenomenon, I feel like it'll be easier to define what being queer actually is. I sort of see queerness as
I don't really care. To say you're missing the point would be an understatement, because if people were just discovering that they were in fact these things, you wouldn't see the drop-off rate that we're seeing now with this new data. So obviously, this is just incorrect. The truth is, the reason why people became trans during the pandemic, non-binary, they, thems, whatever, is the same reason why a lot of weird stuff went on during the pandemic. It's the same reason why people were following nonsensical rules that they knew somewhere deep down in their like subconscious didn't make any sense, but were so scared and just did it anyways. It was that hypnosis, right? It was that mass formation psychosis. It was the fact that, according to neuroscience, this is science, when a trauma occurs in someone's life, their suggestibility skyrockets. So when something terrible happens, which is this pandemic, and this, you know, for me, it was less about the pandemic being scary and more about that mass formation psychosis. Like I said, people's behavior, the way people were becoming insane. That was what scared me. I actually had a few breakdowns about it during it. I remember going one time to the Grove in LA and seeing like a baby in a stroller with a mask on, and I just lost it. I like started crying in public. I went home. I was like, I don't know what's going on right now. But anyways, the reason people in that suggestibility state of the post-trauma, people were then on their phones or trapped at home. You got to remember, there's a lot of people who never questioned who they were in their life. A lot of y'all are walking around, no idea who you are. A lot of y'all are walking around, never questioned why you do the certain things that you do. And for the first time, people had that space and that like time to do that. And they're getting fed with, you know, trans content on TikTok. Social contagion, 1 + 1 = 2. So you have this gap in people where they're just looking for answers because the world outside of their four walls of their home is no longer making sense. They take that data in, and on that kind of a level, it could have been anything. It could have been any trend, but it just so happens it was this really destructive one. And it's so crazy how I don't know how many red flags we even needed for people to see that it was a trend. As soon as you saw celebrities jumping on the bandwagon, how could it be anything but a trend? As soon as you got someone like Trisha Paytas.
Well, I consider myself a transgender male, and I don't have all the answers. I don't have all the correct terminology for people. I'm not a spokesperson for the community. It's just who I am.
Maybe that's a hint that it's a trend. As soon as you have all the pop stars, right? Themi, they, Vado. You know what I mean? I feel like the writing was on the wall a little bit. And mind you, I'm coming here telling you this as a transsexual myself. So it's not that trans in its totality is a trend. And this is the nuance that libs and defenders of the trans trend just can't really get there mentally, is that when someone says trans is a trend, does that mean that every single person who is trans is following a trend? Obviously not, especially if you transitioned before the trend. Which, notice, I'm not seeing the same level of like detransitioners and people who transitioned before the trend as I am after. And a lot of these people are children, a lot of these people are babies. Adults don't know who they are. How can we expect children to? Which reminds me of a very poignant clip. This video might just be thrown back to all my Blaire White was right moments. The Jubilee debate. Just watch this. The idea that a child can consent to a sex change, to gender affirming surgery, if you believe that, there's really nothing that you can believe they can't consent to. right? Because that's pretty extreme. That's permanent body modification under the best circumstances. So you want to move aside all the complications, all the things you can't do, the sterilization, not being able to feed your kids. You can even set that aside. Just the permanent body modification. I mean, you have to be so demented to believe that a child fully understands. I heard a few conversations about, well, if the child fully understands, they don't. They don't, because they're children.
But see, the thing is, though, some adults don't even understand what they want to do.
Exactly.
So, that's
So how
the
can a
thing.
child?
But
But
see,
I
a children.
wanna touch
Wait a
on
minute.
one
Let's
thing
not
you said.
underestimate the power of these kids today. Okay, they are very much more educated because they have much more resources and access than we did
Wow.
coming up. So let's be
So
very
they're
clear about
advanced
that.
and they can
when we
consent.
talk
Who
about
else says that?
detransition-
So I decided to go on Reddit. Horrific statement. Horrific. But I did, and I wanted to see how they were coping with this new data. I heard less people identified as Wiccan when they were burning witches at the stake, proving that Wiccans were just a social contagion. Which is obviously a sarcastic comment, but it's funny you go straight to witch because we know that's what you are. That would, of course, mean that we are actually living in a reality where it's the people criticizing the trans movement causing harm and not the people within the movement causing harm, right? See, the people outside the movement aren't actually cutting the minors' breasts off. The people outside of that movement aren't actually sterilizing children. So the harm's coming from within. The call is coming from within. And that's just a really dumb comparison. They don't want to end up on watch lists. I don't know. I just feel like these people really do feel like they live in Nazi Germany. This is really their fairy tale. This is really their fantasy they're living in. And sometimes I wonder if it's a sexual thing. Like, are some people turned on by like role playing that they live in Nazi Germany? I don't get it. Could it be the social attacking coming back, making them afraid again? Well, I'll say this. If social pressure, social stigma, if people having a negative opinion of you can actually convince you to detransition or to not be who you really are, if that's really who you are, then it wasn't you in the first place. It wasn't you in the first place. I've faced all of that and more. I've faced people not getting it, and I'm like, what does that have to do with me when it comes to me being trans? So if you can be dissuaded by the current, cultural temperature, then that proves the point that you're not really trans, because if you really were, you would walk that walk. This is a really interesting comment. Once it drops to elementary schools, their older siblings cringe and stop being into it. This happened to my kid. She was all about these labels and wanted pronouns and a new name her first year of middle school. Middle school is scary. The kids are not okay. The kids are not okay. Until the next year when the younger kids were even more into it and she slowly backed off and complained about how cringe the younger kids were. I've seen this among my kid and her peers. There was a huge movement for it in the last years of primary school, with them all choosing a range of different labels. Now they're all at high school a few years on, that's entirely rejected. And more troublingly, my daughter reports that there's a lot of homophobia about, to the point where they're actually bullying gay and lesbian kids. So that's the pendulum right there, that society has a really tough time just finding that balance point, which is the healing point. That's where we all heal, is that balance point where you don't have to convince yourself that you are the other gender yourself, and you also don't have to bully other kids. Like, teach your kids balance, please. This either or, that we have to be that or hate people who are that, is like really unhealthy. So in the midst of the trend going down, I think that should be the goal, that people are like, just treat it exactly like it is. Something that afflicts a very small amount of people. Keyword people. All people are human beings made in the image of God. All people deserve respect. And also, respect is given and reciprocated. Respect is given and you get it back. I just don't think that's radical. I just really don't. But I'm the radical. There are still a lot of things that have been put into place in the past few years that we've all been in this weird psychosis about gender that are still there. So for instance, California is still a trans sanctuary state. There are still laws all across the country that a child can be taken from their parents if their parent doesn't affirm their gender identity. So what about those kids now that have permanently altered bodies, permanently sterile bodies, that have no recourse, Like, there's still people that are going to be detransitioning from this period that have yet to do that. And not only are people in denial of that right now, throughout the entire trend of it, people on, in the pro-trans rights movement, on the liberal side, have all pretended as if that didn't exist. I want to take it back to this woman named Jamie Reed, who is a whistleblower out of a gender clinic in Missouri, who reported and really like blew the lid off of the gender clinic that they were transitioning kids whose pronouns were changing every day, some of them identified as animals, and that several people came back after surgeries asking for things like to have their breasts put back on, which is like, I don't know. Some of this stuff sounds crazy to even say out loud.
We have created a medical system where we have put all of this on the kids.
Well, there's a incredibly heartbreaking anecdote which you cite, which is the young girl who, asks to have her breasts put back on after double mastectomy. I don't even know what to say about that. But horribly misled and, abused, it comes to mind.
It was a failure on so many individuals going in to allow her to have that surgery. But the thing then that just was such a gut check was on the back end. You have a patient calling within 3 months of surgery, reporting this, and the surgeon couldn't even bother to take the call or call them back.
There's so many lessons to pull out of what's been this trans trend for so long. Not all of them have anything to even do with gender at all. One of the things that I have been thinking about is how it really disproves this whole notion of like all progress is actually progress, that like new things, innovative ideas about people, as long as this whole like forward thinking myth that comes from the left, they really proved that like no, like not all progress is actually progress. Some of the stuff is actually regresses. Some of this stuff is harmful. And just because something is new, there is a new social attitude, it doesn't mean that it is healing something from the past. In fact, this new social attitude on trans completely dismantled and destroyed any credibility of the movement of like, and I say movement, of just the group of real transsexuals that existed before it. It also greatly harmed gay people and lesbians. It also greatly harmed women and children. People get confused about why trans was such an integral part of the last election, I would say the last 2 elections, and how it was like this really big deciding factor for people maybe switching to Republican. And it's because of what it actually shows. It shows that the left engages in a lot of mythology about their values, a lot of like lies about how progress is good. Some progress is not good. You can progress in a bad way. This whole false dichotomy of one side in the country is pushing people forward and one side is holding people back, that being conservatives, that whole mythology, that lie, was really represented quite well in the trans trend, because it showed you guys don't know what you're doing to be, holding the wheel like this, to be with your foot on the gas, taking us new places. Like, you're not taking us forward, you're dragging us back. One of the lessons out of this is like what humanity is capable of. Like, humanity really can go through a, decade of suddenly out of nowhere believing that children can undergo sex changes. Like, they can just decide that for a decade and then throw it out and be like, oh my God, what was that? Like, we were in a haze. It really shows just the unpredictability of human nature, the unpredictability of where society can go, and how quickly things can just get so twisted and effed up. And I guess we know that from history, but, we've lived through a lot of history in these past few years. Thank you again to Ground News for sponsoring this video. Go check them out in the link in the description. Follow me on X, TikTok, Instagram, subscribe to this channel as well as my podcast channel, and I will see you in the next video, for which maybe we'll make some more predictions and be right. Bye, guys.